Well, folks, we've got more Death Knight cards, and boy, oh boy, do these look insane. There are some absolutely busted cards here, I think. And this guy just looks really cool. I love the look of this character. This is Thessarian, a new 4-mana 3/3 undead. He's a single frost card, and he's got Reborn, and he's got Battle Cry and Death Rattle. Deal 2 damage to a random enemy. So there's a lot going on here. Basically, you got 2 bodies on this guy, kind of like an old piloted shredder vibe, right? Just a sticky little dude on board that's kind of hard to deal with. Just gonna get you some chip damage very often, hitting that 3/3 in, just kind of taking a little hit here and there. But then also, when your opponent's dealing with this thing, they've also got these 2 damage pings going off, which means they might occasionally take a little extra face damage, might have trouble maintaining their board against all these little pings eating up their minions. So I think this is just one of those like high friction cards that often feels pretty good to play, because there's just so much damage going out of this one. And there'll be moments where the opponent's like, I don't really want to deal with that right now. Gosh, it's so frustrating. And they don't. Then you just get to hit for 3. There's still a problem lingering there on board. And as you're going to see in this video, we're going to have a lot of frost cards that are all about doing little bits of damage. There are all these little ways to poke at your opponent, essentially. Dealing 2 here, dealing 2 there, dealing 2 there, and then some big burst damage potential as well, finishing them off with some spells. So I think cards like this are going to contribute pretty nicely to a game plan for Frost Death Knight, where they're just whittling down the opponent, grinding them out over time with all this damage, and then eventually just finding those lethal blows. And Thessarian does that while also contributing, of course, to the corpse total of your Death Knight there. So you're getting a couple corpses off this one, which I think Frost is going to be a little light on minions, it seems, maybe. So this card could be really important to help make sure you've got Frost stuff going, you've got that chip damage rolling, and therefore I think this card's going to be pretty good to play. I think you're going to feel good about this one a lot on turn 4. It just seems like a lot to deal with for the opponent. So I think Thessarian is both a nice model for what to expect off the rest of these Death Knight cards in this video, but also a pretty neat little card. And I just think this character is one of the coolest looking characters, pun intended, that I've ever seen. I love the look of this dude. So next up here, let's talk about Lady Death Whisper, our other legendary, and she looks so freaking cool in this artwork. 4-mana, triple frost card, 4/3 undead, and Death Rattle copy all frost spells in your hand. So some value generation here in this Death Rattle, and I think actually some pretty insane value generation, because you're running these frost spells, you care about them, and getting extra copies of them can go a long way. We're going to see a lot of frost spells in this video, and a lot of frost spell synergy stuff, where having big hands of frost spells is going to pay off. So I think that Death Whisper here has some pretty nice synergies that naturally play into the rest of the cards we're going to see, including, you know, just getting extra reach for damage output. There's a lot of damage frost spells, so this could generate a bunch of extra total damage, helping you just kill your opponent or set up combo turns, or just find some extra removal as well. Now, the issue with this card is that it's all delayed quite a bit on this Death Rattle. You're not getting the cards right away. So this is not something that like late in the game is going to be good in the pinch. We like immediate card generation and card draw most of the time in Hearthstone. That said, does the total output of this card overcome the downside of the delay? In other words, is getting, you know, 3 or 4 frost spells going to be worth any delay? And I think it probably depends a little bit on the deck build here. If you're playing a like slower, grindier, more like combo oriented deck almost, and you want to accrue a bunch of resources and set up for a big pop off late in the game, I think Death Whisper contributes to that pretty well. If you're playing like the more aggressive style and you want to go really hard face and want to tempo out, I don't think Death Whisper is going to be worth it. Number one, you might have smaller hands that just only have 1 or 2 frost spells available, might have a more minion basis. And number 2, she might just take a little too long to get what you need out of it. Or your deck may not be really structured to have the survivability to last long enough to even use all of the spells that you get out of her. So there are probably certain deck lists and certain scenarios where she lines up really well, where you're getting the right number of frost spells. They're doing the right thing. You can sacrifice a little tempo by taking kind of a down 4-mana turn here, and that's where Death Whisper is really going to shine. Now that said, I think she is going to be really good in a scenario like that. Not every deck's going to need it, but some, well, certainly not, because she's triple rune number 1. So already slicing off pretty thin slice here of what's possible. But even within that, I think there are a couple archetypes for frost decks, more of like minion based aggro, more combo. But I think the deck that uses Death Whisper is going to be really happy that they have her. I think getting, you know, 3 or 4 extra cards you love, maybe 2, maybe 0, sure, but I think often 2 to 4 is a very realistic goal. 5, I guess, is possible if you happen to have all 5 exactly 5 open spots and 5 frost spells in hand. But I think that deck will love Lady Death Whisper, and I think because of that, she's going to feel like a pretty strong card in that world, sometimes maybe even a frustrating card. Just, you know, very narrow, very specific use case, but powerful within it. So now let's take a look at some of the spell synergy stuff in Death Knight, and this looks pretty nuts. Death Chiller, a 2-mana 2/3 elemental. It's a double frost rune. After you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to 2 random enemies. So yeah, this is a bit like a mini Flame Waker of old. There is an important distinction here in the wording though, because this says 2 random enemies as opposed to split among random enemies. That does mean this is always going to try to target 2 things. And if there aren't 2 things to target, say it's just your opponent's face, then it's only going to hit once per spell. That's similar to some stuff we have in duels that has the same wording where it only goes off 1 time if there's only 1 card to target. But despite that, still, of course, if your opponent has lots of minions on board, this is a very cheap way to ping through a bunch of minions per spell. And then also if it's a minion and face, you're still going to be able to push some face damage while chipping down a minion as well. So still a lot of output potential on this. 2 damage per spell ultimately still lines up to a lot of pings going out of this card for only 2 mana. That is not much of an overhead here for a lot of potential output, and we're gonna see both lots of frost spells that are also good at dealing damage, and we're gonna see even some spell discount mechanics as well, and some spell draw mechanics, all of which means you weave that together and you've got here a card which, you know, I could easily see doing 4 to 6 damage. Not all to face, of course, again, but, you know, helping you pull a board back and pushing a little bit of chip damage as well, which I think Frost Death Knights are going to be a lot of chip damage and a lot of damage output. So I think this really does fit nicely into that mold. This is exactly what you want to be doing with all of these other supporting Frost cards. So I do think this will feel a little bit like a cherry on top of the deck, a little bit of an engine of sorts, a little bit of a reward for the game plan you're playing. I don't think it's like crazy, totally busted. Yeah, it's better than Flame Waker in a lot of ways, but I don't think it's like totally over the moon because that face damage limit is going to hurt this. Sometimes you'd get those Flame Wakers on an empty board and you'd have permanent cost discounts and you just go absolutely insane. You're not going to do that with this because if you just have face, this is only dealing 1 damage per spell. That's not going to go absolutely crazy and pop off. And I don't think without, you know, like Sorcerer's Apprentice type plays, you're going to have that same sort of thing. So this is less of like the big crazy, you know, game winning sort of turn card and more about, I think, a really solid piece of the puzzle that just fits in nicely to the game plan, allows you to take some swings, leave it on board, you get a corpse sort of thing. You know, it's more about getting there as opposed to being the big finisher. But still, I think while getting there could be a very efficient tool and very swiggy tool at that. Speaking of cost discounts, here's the Rime Fang Sword, a new 3-mana 2/3 weapon, double frost rune. After your hero attacks, reduce the cost of a spell in your hand by 1. So after 3 turns, this will have effectively paid for itself, reducing the mana cost of a few things with those cheaper spells in hand. Of course, that allows you to do things like pop off with our previous card, but also maybe just set up like a crazy burst damage turn where you've been saving up a bunch of burst frost damage spells, you've been chipping away at the opponent, and now you've got 7-8 mana. You're just going to start launching everything face, since everything's a little bit more affordable via the Rime Fang Sword. And along the way, this 2/3 weapon maybe chip through some minions, maybe get a little attack here or there for face as well. So this might put, you know, 2-4 damage, 6 damage face, and all of that's adding up again to this face race high pressure sort of game plan that Frost Death Knight seems to be encouraging. I will actually say this kind of looks like one of the more fair weapons of the ones we're gonna see in this video. There's a couple more that are pretty crazy, so I think this looks solid. I think this has a lot of options to be played, and I don't even think this is the craziest weapon in this video, so stay tuned. We're gonna get into some strong stuff. First, though, let's talk about some of the spells you're going to be discounting. This is Howling Blast, a new 3-mana frost spell, single rune, whole frost, of course. Deal 3 damage to an enemy and freeze it, and deal 1 damage to all other enemies. So yeah, that's a swipe, basically. 3 damage swipe here, but it also has a freeze bundled in with it, which I think is actually really important. Sometimes that's going to be nice to lock down the opposing Death Knight's face, because I think everybody's going to be playing Death Knight. So sometimes you'll need to lock down their weapon so they can't discount a spell. Other times, you know, there might be like a big giant Tintin minion you just have to deal with, and sometimes this freeze will be important while still cleaning up some small stuff alongside it. And sometimes you don't care about the freeze, you'll just be happy to get a pretty efficient swipe, or honestly just send 3 to face and, you know, deal with some 1/1s your opponent has summoned along the way. So I think this looks very efficient. That swipe shape of card has worked really well historically in Hearthstone. I don't see that changing. I think there's probably more 2/2s than 1/1s these days, but still, this is just you know, a lot of total damage bundled into a single card, and the ability to freeze adds that layer of utility that I think really shores up any potential weaknesses in this one. So I think it looks really good. This seems like another staple option for Death Knight in the Frost world. So we just got a new and better version of Swipe. What about a new and better version of Consecration to go along with it? This is Remorseless Winter, 4 mana, single Frost rune, Frost spell school, and deals 2 damage to all enemies, and on top of that, draws you a card. So it's Consecration plus a bonus card, which, hey, that's not too bad. This fits into a mold of, you know, a lot of these deal 2 damage AoEs that we've had, but this one doesn't go face. That's nice for a deck that's looking to chip away face damage, unlike something, say, like Rancor, for instance, which is just strictly about board clears. This one's hitting some extra face damage, which probably matters for this deck, because all that little chip damage is adding up over time. And then you're also, you know, getting another resource. You're just getting more damage. You're getting more stuff to do on top of that. So, you know, I don't think you should look at this as like a strictly control deck type tool. I don't think this is about being super defensive. I think this is about like filling your turns, getting some chip damage, making sure you don't get swarmed or overwhelmed by hordes of undead or volatile skeletons, whatever they might be, but, you know, keeping up on board while still moving into that later stage of the game where you're finding all those damage pieces. You're just working down, grinding through the opponent's health total, essentially, and this is a step along the way. And I think it's a pretty solid one. Of course, it's, you know, it's got things that have worked historically in Hearthstone. It's got good patterns, still deal 2 damage, still frankly works really nicely in Hearthstone even up to these days, and drawing cards is always great. So not like hyper efficient, not crazy powerful looking in a weird way, despite being a lot better than Consecration. That's a card that pairs nicely with a quality and Paladin, but outside of that, doesn't exactly feel great. But still, I think, you know, when you add all that together, seems like it does fit into the Death Knight puzzle rather nicely. So speaking of those other weapons we talked about, this is Bone Breaker, a 1 mana single frost weapon. It's a 2/2 weapon, and it reads, after hero attacks a minion, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So this allows you to tidy up your opponent's early board threats. They get a Flame Imp down. No, sir. Gonna bone break that, but I'm also still hitting you for 2 damage. And this reminds us a little bit of Dread Prison Glaive in Demon Hunter. It doesn't quite have, you know, the like damage manipulation flexibility of something like Glaive, but has that consistent baseline 2/2, which I think is pretty solid. That's really nice. I mean, this is just a 2/2 weapon with a really distinct and big upside. And again, it really plays towards that chip damage. I'm just grinding your health total down while not losing any board advantage. The last 2 cards have both sort of fit that mold. So I think this looks really solid, very efficient, high output. I don't think every deck's going to want to run this, because some metas, some decks won't care as much about those early board plays. They're going to care more about investing into good early game minions as opposed to reactive stuff. But for the more reactive decks, for the ones that maybe play a little more like Freeze Mage as opposed to aggro decks, Bonebreaker could be a great fit. And speaking of ones that might want to play more like aggro decks, this is the Ymir Jar Frostbreaker, a 1 mana 1/2 single frost battlecry. Gain +1 attack for each frost spell in your hand. So we've seen quite a few frost spells already that really make a lot of sense as damage output finishers for an aggressive deck, and that means this could easily be a 2/2, a 3/2, perhaps even a 4/2 on turn 1, which obviously is a really aggressive opener. If there's a deck that has to face down a 4/2 and they can't answer it really quickly, well, they're gonna die. Clearly getting hit in the face for 4/2 on top of all the other crazy damage available to Death Knight is gonna make this a pretty monstrous threat. I mean, think about like the Battle Fiends of Demon Hunter, you know, those would scale up to 2/2s or 3/2s and they'd be so scary. And this might just start as a 4/2. Of course, it's got the downside of whiffing, but, you know, playing a 1/2 or a 2/2 is not a disaster on turn 1, particularly for a deck that needs bodies for corpses anyway. You're going to just be happy to have minions sometimes, I think, to get your corpses set up. But then the occasional just steamroll upside of this being like a 4-2 early in the game is going to run over people and steal games. So I think that potential is so high that the Frostbreaker here is going to look like a pretty strong card. Speaking of bodies, this is the Harbinger of Winter, and she seems to have a pretty nice one. It's a 2-mana 2/2 undead double frost rune, and she's got a death rattle here that draws you a frost spell. So a little bit of a tutor there with a frost spell aspect. Now, I will say, if you're running this in a 2-rune frost deck, you're probably gonna have a lot of frost spells anyway. This likely doesn't feel so like specific as a tutor necessarily. It might feel more like just like I'm just drawing a spell basically in my deck with a little bit of a reassurance that you're not going to whiff on, you know, some kind of frost spell specifically. There could technically be worlds where you use this to fish out something really specific in a different focused deck. Like you've got a lot of unholy stuff at 1 rune unholy, and for some reason you need one really specific frost spell, and this could do that, but that seems unlikely. It seems most likely this is going to just fit into a lot of other frost stuff. So really kind of like drawing a spell. It is on a delay, which sometimes that's unfortunate. Sometimes you want your cards to be drawn immediately if you're late in the game and you're really desperate for some damage output, and it's like I really need damage now, and it's like, oh, I've only got the Harbinger of Winter, it's gonna be hard to kill her off. Okay, maybe that's not a great result. But if you play this on turn 2, I think that's absolutely fine. Just get another body down, get the gears turning, get some corpses rolling with the Harbinger of Winter here. So I can see some lines there, but ultimately I do think a little less exciting, a little less crazy than some of the other cards we've seen, which might mean Harbinger of Winter doesn't feel great to run. Maybe she's near the bottom of the list as far as your excitement levels are concerned. She may be one of the last cards you add, but might still make the cut just because Death Knight needs cards right now, and this is fitting enough, but I don't think she'll feel like one of the best cards in the deck. And then we have the Rime Sculptor here, do 5 mana, single frost rune, 3/3 undead, battlecry, summon 2 2/1 Rime Elementals with Death Rattle, deal 2 damage to a random enemy. This card has a lot going on for just a random old 5 mana rare, but 3 bodies here basically, getting a bunch of corpses off this card, and the bonus ones there have a little Death Rattle for additional chip damage. So this could be a corpse enabler for Frost decks. This is another way to just get stuff down and try to get those little damage pings rolling off. Ultimately, I don't think this looks great at 5 mana for me. It's like, okay, I value the corpses. Yes, that's important because it doesn't seem like Frost builds are going to have that many ways to reliably make corpses. This is more like spell-based, weapon-based. So you might need cards like this, but at 5 mana, it's perhaps coming along a little too late. By then, the 2 damage chippiness of these Death Rattles is probably just going to hit your opponent's minions a little bit here and there. Doesn't feel like it's going to consistently be pushing face. The total stat output of this card doesn't really feel high enough that it's like a big high-pressure situation for your opponent to deal with. So all in all, I don't know if this one's going to make it. I feel like you're going to be doing bigger and better things with your mana at this stage of the game. And this, if it is being run, will feel a little just like, okay, I got a Rime Sculptor, that's all right. If there was a really, really consistent high pressure minion opener for Death Knights, where this kind of like capped off, like, okay, man, I've just been building this insane board every turn. This maybe caps it off on turn 5 as like a final, like, okay, you've dealt with my last 4 turns. Can you deal with this final, wave of minions? Maybe you could see the Rime Sculptor being okay there, but I think that's like a perfect lineup, perfect scenario, and maybe doesn't fit the Frost deck type as much. If this is going to get played, I could almost see this being splashed into like a 2 unholy deck that wants a little bit of reach damage with Frost, and a Rime Sculptor fits because it's more about going wide, more about the kind of minion swarm aspect. So maybe there are other runes that are going to support this better than Frost itself, but still, I just don't think this card does anything completely crazy like a lot of the other Death Knight cards we're seeing, which means it might fall short. Moving on to the Repulsive Gargantuan. Guys, I finally got my card. They finally named a card after me. It's a 4 mana single frost rune, 3/6 undead, and he reads enemy characters can't be healed. So that's a fun little idea here. We've got all this damage we're trying to stack up over the course of the game, grind opponents down, and then you dump a Repulsive Gargantuan. Ha ha ha, you can't heal. Or maybe you can, but you gotta kill the Gargantuan first, which maybe that causes a little bit of disruption. Maybe it takes a little too much mana, then the heal's not enough, or they can't squeeze the heal in. That's the idea here for the Gargantuan. In reality, I suspect it's gonna be really hard to find the right sort of timing or windows to play this. And if you do, I don't know that the opponent's going to feel all that put out by having to kill it before, you know, enacting whatever sort of heal they're looking for. I mean, I can imagine very specific board states and scenarios where that feels good, but I think there will be a lot of others where this is just sitting in hand. You're like, okay, I'll play it, but would I rather just have a big high pressure threat for my 4 mana as opposed to this sort of sneaky solution to a problem that I may not even really have, particularly in a lot of game states. You're playing other aggro decks or something. It's like, well, okay, why didn't I just play a better 4-drop that's just killing people instead? And I think that's where this card will land a lot of the time. People will make decisions that say, yeah, no, I'd rather just have something that's hitting them harder, creating more pressure. And I don't think this 3/6 body is really ever doing enough for me. So I don't think the Gargantuan's going to really make a lot of deck lists. I suspect there will just be cooler things to do. But I really like that this card exists. I think occasionally getting it off some random effect or discover or something will feel really timely and fitting, and it'll be a nice card to be in Hearthstone, just maybe not a nice card to be in your decks. So moving on, we have the Might of Menethil, another crazy weapon, I think. This one's 4 mana, double Frost Rune. It's a 4/2 weapon, and it reads Battlecry, spend up to 3 corpses, freeze that many enemy minions. So we've got a nice little potential board stall here for the Might of Menethil, which I think is great if you're a deck that's looking to go face a lot. You can just say, no, I'm not really worried about your minions. I'm planning to kill you in the next couple turns. I'm just going to stall out those minions for a little bit here and whack you for 8 off the Might of Menethil, while also setting up to kill you next turn with some crazy, you know, turn 5 burst damage. Or I'm going to just stall those out and clean those up later in some other AoE combination that I don't really have right now, but just ignore those for a minute. There is, you know, this 3 corpse challenge. You're going to need to have 3 corpses, but I don't think that's a lot to ask. And sometimes even just having that 1 corpse, because it says up to 3, will be fine. Your opponent plays 1 big threat. You just want to freeze it off with a Might of Menethil. I think that's great. So big damage output potential in a weapon like this. 4/2 weapons still feel pretty good in Hearthstone, I think. And the ability to stall out opponents is just a really nice fit for what this archetype looks like they're trying to do. So I think Might of Menethil is going to be a really strong card. Moving on to the Marrow Manipulator. This is a 6 mana triple frost card. It's a 5/5 undead with Battlecry, spin up to 5 corpses and deal 2 damage to a random enemy for each. So that is 10 damage dealt in total if you spend up to 5 corpses. And, you know, that's exciting, I think, in one scenario when your opponent's board is empty. They don't have anything on board. This becomes a 6 mana deal 10 to face sometimes, which that is good. Outside of that, I really think this one's going to be hard to work well with. You know, if your opponent has like 3 3/3s on board, or just a couple, you know, random garbage minions, whatever they are, this starts to look so clunky so fast. Like, oh, okay, I hit that 3/3 for 2. I hit another 3/3 for 2. I did 4 to face. Like, that's okay, I guess. You know, yeah, I like the chip face damage, but I spent 6 mana. All the other stuff I'm doing is like way more efficient than 6 mana. And if you don't have the corpses, of course, this feels really bad. If you're only hitting for, you know, 2 or 3 corpses, like, ugh, 0 corpses, ugh. So I don't know, man. I think this one feels a little bit too conditional. Like, there's just a lot going into this from a mana cost standpoint, the corpse standpoint. I don't think the payoff is consistent enough. Maybe if there's ways to clear enough stuff that this is always hitting face or very regularly hitting for 8 to 10 to face, it's worth it. But I don't think that lines up all that often. I think this is going to feel more awkward than good most of the time. Thessarian is a 4-star card. Lady Death Whisper is a 4-star card. Death Chiller is a 4-star card. Rhymefang Sword is a 3-star card. Howling Blast is a 4-star card. Remorseless Winter is a 4-star card. Bonebreaker is a 4-star card. Ymir Jar Frostbreaker is a 4-star card. Harbinger of Winter is a 3-star card. Rhyme Sculptor is a 3-star card. Repulsive Gargantuan is a 2-star card. Might of Menethil is a 4-star card. Marrow Manipulator is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this particular Death Knight card review. Curious to hear what you guys think about this package. It's weird. I know that a lot of these cards look insane, and I know I gave a lot of them 4 stars, but you know, 5-star cards are like build defining, meta defining stuff. And the problem is, all of these are good, and you know, in a lot of other classes they would feel that way, but against each other, of course, right? They all are in the same class, so which one really stands out as the best? It's hard to say that this is the one that's the build defining, meta defining sort of card. So they're all going to be like good playable cards, I think, right? But they're all making up the basis for the class. They're all just the core of the deck. So they can't all be 5-star cards, basically, but I think a lot of really good stuff here, a lot of really powerful standout cards, which seem like they're going to drive Death Knight in a pretty powerful direction here for Frost. So curious to hear your thoughts and more in the comments below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.